There's been a lot of talk lately about CGC giving out more 9.9 and 10.0 grades. They recently gave the first 9.9 to a copy of Ultimate Fallout 4 First Miles Morales earlier this year. It sold on Comic Link back in August, and I'm going to show you that auction closing in this video. But there were a bunch of other 9.9s in that same auction, including a Bronze Age Spider-Man key and one of the oldest Marvel books ever to get that grade. So it made me curious to look more deeply into what's going on with 9.9s and what it actually means when CGC gives one out. I'm going to get to the auction soon, but first I want to give you some context. CGCdata.com is a very handy resource for digging into the CGC census. It doesn't just show you the populations like you can get from GoCollect, GP Analysis, or directly from CGC. It keeps track of the dates when books were added to the census, so you can use it to go back in time and get a picture of how comic populations have changed through the years. Right here on the front page, they've got grand totals, and you can see right away the current total number of comics graded by CGC. Right now, it's just over 10 million graded books. And then just below that, you'll see something that surprised the heck out of me. Of the 10 million graded books, 40% have a near-perfect 9.8 grade. The books on the wall behind me are mostly between 4.0 and 7.0, which are all either 1 or 2% of the population, but almost half the books sent in come back at 9.8. And then right next to that, you can see that a relatively tiny number of 47,000, about 1 out of every 100 9.8s, comes back at 9.9. And then 14,000, a little over a third of the 9.9 number, get a perfect 10.0. But I've never even seen a 10.0, and I'm not going to get into them in this video. So we can get a much clearer picture of what's going on with these numbers by clicking on the by decade chart. What this shows is the grade distribution on books published in each decade. Right off the bat, looking at the 2020s, that's just books published in the last 5 years, we see more than half of the 9.9 grades ever issued. And of the books that didn't get that grade, virtually all of them, 85%, got a 9.8. What that boils down to in the hobby is that CGC gets $20 for rubber stamping practically every modern book that comes in, which is not to say they're not inspecting them, and I'm not saying the books don't deserve the grade. It's just that there's very little opportunity for a book that's just been printed to go down in condition. And statistically, about 1 in every 100 of those modern books will be deemed worthy of going a notch higher. So you as the collector have that incentive to send your books in and take a gamble, because there is money to be made on that 9.9 jackpot. Cognitively, it's a bit like what our brains go through when we buy scratch-off lottery tickets or a pack of Pokemons hoping for that rare card. Folks, I'm just going to say it. This is a dumb corner of the hobby. If the collectors sending off brand new books to CGC are enjoying themselves, that's their business, and I know I should leave them alone. If they're hoping to make a quick profit from a 9.9, maybe they'll get lucky. But if they think there's any sort of long-term investment justification for this practice, that modern books will still hold value to anyone years from now, and that the special grade will set them apart, sorry, no. That's my 2 cents on modern 9.9s, but what about older books? Let's look at how the grade distributions change as we go back through the decades. If we look at the 2010s, the numbers are about the same. Still mostly 9.8s with another 10,000 9.9s. So that's almost 80% of the total 9.9 population published since 2010. The slope softens a bit in the 2000s, more in the 90s, and further still in the 80s, but we're still seeing 9.8s and 9.6s on the majority of books. The Bronze Age 1970s is where the chart starts to flatten out, and we see only 223 9.9 books. Then in the 60s, we've suddenly got a dramatically different grade distribution. 7.0 is now the most common grade, and only 32 books have ever gotten 9.9s. So what we've learned so far is pretty obvious. Most 9.9s are modern, while bronze and silver 9.9s are extremely rare and kind of a big deal. Stick with me though, because this is where it gets interesting. CGC Data actually has a spreadsheet listing every single book that's ever gotten a 9.9. I exported the spreadsheet and sorted it by grading date, and that's where I found something surprising. First, let me clarify. I just talked about publication date. That's when the comics came out. Grading date is different. That's when the book was submitted to CGC. The oldest CGC grades date to around 2001, so this is their 25th year of grading books. I sorted the 9.9 list by grading date and counted up the total number of books graded in each year. Take a look at this. You can clearly see they started out giving a lot of 9.9s, then dropped off sharply after 2009. There's a weird spike in 2017 and then a gradual increase since the pandemic boom. Now, from a data science standpoint, this graph looks very unnatural. The number of submitted books has been generally increasing year by year, and it's reasonable to infer that the overall condition of books submitted to CGC has stayed roughly the same in that time. So the number of 9.9s should be growing at a comparably steady rate, not growing, then collapsing, then spiking briefly, collapsing again, and then steadily growing. What this shape suggests very strongly is that CGC's grading standards for 9.9 have evolved over the years. It looks like 9.9s were given out pretty liberally in the early years, and then a policy shift meant that suddenly almost no books got them, and 9.8 was as high as you could get. And then recently, standards have begun to soften again. It's also reasonable to suggest that the recent softening was a result of competition from other grading companies like PGX and now PSA, which have found a competitive advantage by being more generous with ultra-high grades. Now I want to show you one last thing that is sort of the smoking gun. Here is that same list of 9.9 books sorted by publication date, starting with the very oldest books. There are some books in here I'm going to disregard because they're mostly obscure and not in demand, but you can see a string of ECs here in the 50s, which makes sense because William Gaines famously stored 2 file copies of each issue. So I would bet a lot of these 9.9s were his copies from straight off the printing press. Then we get to the 60s and we start seeing our first Silver Age Marvel books with Tales of Suspense 47, then ASM 19, Tales to Astonish 76, and then Fantastic Four 55, which you'll see in this auction. In total, there are 13 Marvel Silver Age books graded at 9.9, and all of them, with the exception of one, were graded between 2001 and 2004. So they were all among the very first grades ever given out. The last Silver Age Marvel book to get the grade was Spectacular Spider-Man issue 2 in 2009. I see 2 big takeaways from that. The first is that while 9.9s may become more common again, older books will probably stay more or less capped at 9.8, which will keep these books extremely rare and inevitably make them highly sought after. The other big takeaway is that, to put it bluntly, 9.9 is not a real thing. It's a jackpot CGC turns on or off based on market conditions or just their own whims. And that seems to be the core grievance among collectors, especially those who own 9.8 books that lose their status as the highest graded copies when a new 9.9 is given. Last year, CGC gave out their first 9.9 to a giant-size X-Men 1 from 1975. Not a Silver Age book, but an unusually old one to get that grade. It sold on Comic Connect for $170,000 and instantly meant the 270 9.8 copies were no longer tied for the highest graded. That probably made about 270 high-end collectors understandably cranky. You're going to hear me say this in the auctions, but it's worth saying again. If you cracked all 270 9.8s and the one 9.9 and sent them all back in for grading, do you really think CGC would be able to pick out which one they gave a 9.9 to? I know I wouldn't. Buying a 9.9 book doesn't really mean buying the condition. It means buying the label. I don't want to give the impression that I have it out for CGC. I think they do a great job. They're the trusted standard bearer, and third-party grading is enormously useful and important. The grade distribution of books from the Golden and Silver Age shows that the system makes sense and is effective at its primary function. But the pursuit of ultra-high grades takes the fetishization of comic condition to a ridiculous extreme, creates irrational pricing, rampant speculation, and bubble markets that inevitably pop and bring down prices across the board. Nevertheless, 9.9 auctions are interesting to watch in the way car crashes are interesting to watch. So let's watch some.
All right, we got a Punisher 9.9, which is from 1986. This book is doubly annoying because it is a Punisher book and it's a 9.9. I'm just going to have to hate watch as this auction closes. Bidding's at $4,300, closing in 30 seconds. There is only one 9.9 copy and it has never sold. The fair market value for a 9.8 is $525, the most anybody's ever paid for it. Looks like it was about $2,100 at the peak of the bubble. So we'll see what this 9.9 goes for. It's actually already at $4,300. It just closed. $7,507. So some Punisher fan just paid $7,500 for a comic that would be worth $100 in 9.0. Then we have Venom. Venom Lethal Protector number 1 in 9.9. I found the prices on this one, issue 1 of Venom, are not that outrageous because we'd seen a ton of Venom in ASM before he got his own book. There are 40 9.9s and 11 10s. So this is not one of the 10s. It's one of the 40 9.9s. 8 years ago, somebody paid $300 for a 9.9. Since then, prices have gone higher up into the thousands and stayed there. These are still getting crazy high prices. Fair market at 9.9 is $3,600. This just closed. It was at $2,500, closed at $2,900. This is not rare. It's just Venom. It's not the first appearance of anybody. Is it Todd McFarlane or is somebody imitating Todd McFarlane? Bagley and Sam De La Rosa cover. So this is Mark Bagley copying Todd McFarlane's style. I just find Venom cheesy. He's fine. He has his place. I get it. A lot of people grew up with Venom. $2,900. Let's move on. Then we got Web of Spider-Man #1 and 9.9. We got another 9.9 here. What's going to happen with this? Let's look it up. Web of Spider-Man 1. I remember buying this. 1985. I was getting into comics then. Spider-Man was getting really, really popular around this time. The black costume definitely breathed new life into the character. $770. That's nice to see for a 9.9. There are 11 9.9s and 110. So last sale for this 9.9 was $598. Very old serial number. Early on, 2009, it sold for $1,793. But since then, it's been well under $1,000. So this one probably isn't going to go higher. $770. Oh, whoa. Whoa, we have a record sale for Web of Spider-Man #1. Even the 2009 sale for $1,792, which inflation adjusted would be $2,700. Even that sale doesn't come close to what just happened for Web of Spider-Man #1. Holy smokes, $33.50. It's just almost 5 times the sale price for a book that I remember buying as a kid 40 years ago. We've got Ultimate Fallout #4, first appearance of Miles Morales, 9.9. This book is from 2011. There is only one 9.9. It's a new serial number. This just got graded. It's the first 9.9. If you think this is going to be the only 9.9, you're kidding yourself. This is one of the most graded books in existence, 18,850 copies. We've got 4,495 9.8s and one 9.9 that just got graded. I've said this about another book. If you cracked open all 4,495 9.8s and resubmitted them, would they give any of those 9.9s? Probably. If you take any of the 10,000 or more ungraded copies of this book that are floating around and submitted them to CGC, are any of those going to get 9.9s? Probably. So right now, this is the one and only 9.9. But it's not going to stay the only 9.9. And also, who cares? There's good reason to distinguish a 5.0 from a 6.0. It's helpful. When you get up to 9.0, it starts getting a little silly. You're down to these minute details. I can tell the difference between a 9.0 and a 9.2. 9.6 to 9.8, you're really getting into minute detail. And then with 9.9, CGC, to their credit, has made a video about what makes a 9.9 a 9.9, how it's different from a 9.8. That lends some credibility to this thing that's happening of 9.9 suddenly appearing, but it is so esoteric. Is that right? What does esoteric mean? Esoteric. That's exactly what this means. Something known, understood, or appreciated by only a small number of people, especially those with special knowledge or a shared specialized interest. Now, the comic book hobby, on the whole, is something that requires special knowledge or a shared specialized interest. But when you get into the minutia of grading at the really high level above 9.8, that is deeply, profoundly, and I would say absurdly esoteric. So we have no idea what the 9.9 is going to sell for. 9.8 goes for $850 now because the craziness has died down. And 3 or 4 years ago, this book was going for insane prices. Just a regular old copy, so it was selling for $3,528, and this 9.9 is already at $17,500. Let's see where it closes. 10 seconds in. Oh my God, $28,500. We've still got 5 seconds left. Is somebody else going to swoop in and set the price? You could get a 3.0 Amazing Fantasy 15 for this price. Another bid, $31,001. Yeah, pretty sure an Amazing Fantasy 15 first appearance of Peter Parker Spider-Man would sell in 3.0 for less than this Ultimate Fallout 4 first Miles Morales sold for in 9.9. So we got a Wolverine #1 selling in a minute at 9.9. I got my Wolverine #1 around here somewhere that I bought from my local comic shop just to see what I could do with it, see what it would get graded. And mine came in at 9.2. This one is a 9.9. There are 2 10s. There are 41 9.9s. This book has 29,389 graded copies. It is the 6th or 7th most graded comic in existence. I think this is the beginning of the Copper Age, where direct sales had begun, and there's really a day-night thing with this book. No book before this has anywhere near this number of graded copies. I think there was just a big change in the business side of comic books right around 1982. And you have a lot more copies that have been graded, a lot more copies in very high condition. This 9.9 with 11 tracked sales. The last one was 4 months ago. It sold for $10,200 on Heritage. We've got a Heritage from last year that sold for $15,600. We've come down from that. So they're putting the fair market at $10,200, even though there was a sale last year on eBay for $7,200. And we even have some track sales on the 10s. We have one track sale for $15,535. We're not going to see this on the 9.9. It just closed. It was at $49.88 and it closed at $6,469, below the $7,200. This is the lowest sale price on the 9.9 since 2019. The person who bought it 4 months ago on Heritage missed that we're not paying those prices anymore, at least for Wolverine. We just saw Ultimate Fallout go for $31,000, and we saw Web of Spider-Man go for I think 6,000. People are not feeling it for Wolverine #1 anymore. Amazing Spider-Man 194, first appearance of Black Cat, who I do not consider a very important Spider-Man character, but apparently she's pretty well regarded. This copy, though, is a 9.9 mint. That's why this is interesting. In 9.8, first appearance of Black Cat only goes for about $1,900, which is a lot, but not a lot. There are 4 9.9 copies, and those have sold in years past for $4,000, $3,000, $2,000, and $5,000. But that $5,000 sale was in 2014. 11 years later, we have a 9.9 auction, and the bidding is at $22,000 with 38 seconds left to go. How in the world did that happen? Last sale, $5,000. Suddenly we see it at $22,000. That is unexpected. Something's going on with the 9.9 market that I don't understand. 9.9, of course, white pages. I think to be in 9.9, it has to have white pages. Only 4 of them. This is closing in 3 seconds. And oh my God, 36,888. That is 36. It jumped from 22,000 to 36,888. Whoever is selling this made a bunch of money off this book. I don't know what they bought it for. Maybe they bought it for 40 cents in 1979. It just sold for $36,000. Now, 55 is a really interesting one. This is the single highest graded copy of Fantastic Four number 55 because it's in 9.9 condition. It was graded in, I think, 2002 or 2001. Very early in CGC, they were giving out 9.9s at that point. They stopped. I think we can all agree, without taking too close of a look at this book, if it were cracked open and sent back into CGC for another grade, which would be insane, but were they to do that, it would get a 9.8 because they don't give 9.9s to Silver Age books almost ever. And the only 9.9 of a Fantastic Four in the first 194 issues. So this is closing in 52 seconds. The bidding's at $26,000. Fair market on it for what it's worth. It sold once on Heritage in 2015 for $31,070. So the question is, and this is probably the person who bought it in 2015 who is selling it now. They bought it on Heritage. They're selling it on Comic Link 10 years later, hoping to make some money, having held the book for 10 years, which is what you should do. I saw an Amazing Spider-Man 194 9.9 sell yesterday, and I nearly fell out of my chair. And oh my God! Here we got another 9.9. It's not a first appearance like Amazing Spider-Man 194 is, but it is a Silver Surfer cover very early in Silver Surfer's run. It's the 3rd Silver Surfer cover. Okay, I'm going to click update here. It was at $26,000. The price to beat is $31,070. Wow, that was quite a jump. It shot from $26,000 to $65,555. Owner bought it for $31,070. Up until 5 seconds before the auction closed, it was looking like the owner was going to lose money on this book. Whoever paid $65,555 for this paid for the label. They paid for a label that says 9.9 because, please, CGC, Matt Nelson, somebody, tell me I'm wrong about this. If you got this comic today, if somebody cut this out of the case and sent it to you, would you give this a 9.9? What's the difference between a 9.8 and a 9.9 really? There's some tiny little crack on every other 9.8 copy. How many 9.8s are there? Okay, there's 5. There's 5 9.8s. If we laid out the other 5 9.8s of Fantastic Four 55. Do you think a CGC grader could point to a flaw in each of those 5 books that made them 9.8s instead of 9.9 and then show that there is nothing in this book that dings it down to a 9.8? I'm still catching my breath. 65,000. The owner of this book must have just had a minor heart attack watching that happen, but hopefully they're opening a bottle of champagne right now and celebrating because they doubled their money. Whew. Last book I'm going to talk about tonight. Ooh, I gotta limber up before I talk about this. Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars issue 8. The first appearance of the symbiote, but not really, because the first appearance of the symbiote was in Amazing Spider-Man 252, 8 months before. We saw Spider-Man come back from Battle World with a new costume, but we didn't know how he got it. We didn't know what the deal was. As the Secret Wars series progressed, we found Peter Parker in the medic bay of the superheroes HQ, and I can't remember exactly what happened. He pushes some button and some black ooze comes out and covers his body, and he's got a new suit. At that time, there was no storyline. There was no big reveal of it being an alien symbiote. There was no Venom, but this is a key book because it is his new costume, which eventually led to a whole new character and a very well-liked character. That's neither here nor there. Why this is significant is because this is a 9.9. This is one of the 27 9.9 graded copies of this book. 15679. Let me check. Yeah, okay, this was graded in 2017. This is another 9.9 book that sold in 2017 on eBay for $2,200. And then the exact same book sold on Golden 6 years later for $7,930. So that gives you a sense of what's happened with this book. The craziest sale was on Heritage in 2021 for $16,800. Then we got a $12,000, a $10,800, and a $9,300. These look like, yeah, this is the exact same submission. In the same CGC submission, 109759, we got the 16th book and the 35th book. I'm guessing somebody submitted 40 or 50 copies of Secret Wars number 8. Probably a comic shop owner or something who had a whole box of them, and they got several in 9.9. They sold one of them for $12,000, another for $10,800. Actually, here it is. We've seen multiple sales of this exact serial number. 1209373016 sold in 2015 for $1,307. Then in 2018 for $2,300. Then in 2024 for $10,800. This is 3 sales of the same book, and you can see the trajectory as 9.9s became more prized. This 9.9, maybe things are getting a little less crazy. Maybe people are coming down to earth. Maybe we're going to see some sane sale prices for this book. There's something that happened to 99% of the otherwise perfect books that did not happen to these 32 books that got above 9.8. And that's something that went wrong with those other books. Caused the value to drop to a 20th of what it would otherwise be. This is all very irrational. So when I looked at it the other day, it was at $2,400. The bidding got up to $4,111. The fair market, such as it is for a 9.9, is listed at the last sale price from 2 months ago of $9,300 on Heritage. So $9,300 is the price to beat. $16,800 would be the craziest. I don't think we're going to see that. What did it end up closing for? Before I click update, we've seen the other 9.9s in this auction shoot up in the final seconds to double, triple what they were at. I really hope that doesn't happen here because this is a different species. This is a Copper Age 9.9. Those other books, Silver Age, Bronze Age books, this is Copper Age. Very, very different. 9.9's a lot easier to attain. They use different paper. They use different printing methods by that point. And furthermore, this 9.9 is not even a newsstand copy. It's a direct copy. I'm curious now, how many of these, this is a direct, this is a direct, this is direct, 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 direct. These are all directs. Are there any 9.9s of the newsstand variant? No, there aren't. It's harder to find a 9.8 in newsstand. This was presumably sold on a newsstand in 1984. It's harder to find a perfect copy of a book that was stashed onto a rack and sold on a store or out on the street. All right, I'm just stalling because I don't want to click this button, but I'm going to do it now. Here we go. 6,666. Okay, it didn't double. It jumped. There was a bidding war, but it did not go for as high as it could have and as high as some of these other past sales were. In fact, I don't see a sale price this low for a 9.9 since 2019. It's been 6 years since a copy has sold for this little, so that's kind of good news.
What did you think about those sale prices? Let me hear about it in the comments. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.